Excellent, thank you. Welcome everyone to the Finance, Audit and Risk meeting for July for North Herts District Council. Welcome to this virtual meeting. It's being conducted with members and officers at various locations and communicating via audio and video and online. Before the meeting starts, I would like to invite the committee member and scrutiny officer to explain how proceedings will work and to confirm that members and officers are in attendance.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. So, as said, I will just do a roll call to just confirm that you can hear us and be seen. So, Kate Aspinwall.
Yeah, present.
Thank you. Councillor North.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Collins.
Hello.
Thank you. Councillor Deacon Davies currently absent. Councillor Derbyshire.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Ruggiero Shaka.
Present.
And Councillor Weeks.
Present.
Thank you. Officers, I have Darren Bowler.
Good evening.
Thank you. And I have Ruben.
Present.
Thank you. And Ian Cooper.
Present.
Thank you. And joining this evening, we also have Councillor Ian Albert for Executive Member for IT and Finance. You could just confirm you can hear us.
Yes, thank you, Matthew.
Thank you. Okay, so that's the roll call completed. I'll just run through the proceedings for this evening. The meeting is being streamed live on YouTube and the council's YouTube and Zoom. If live stream fails, the meeting will adjourn. If the live stream cannot be restored within a reasonable period, then the remaining business will be considered at a time and date fixed by the chair. If the chair does not fix a date, the remaining business will be considered at the next ordinary meeting. If for any reason the meeting is not quorate, an officer will notify attendees by interjecting the meeting, and the meeting will adjourn immediately. Once the meeting is quorate, the meeting will resume. If connection cannot be restored within a reasonable period, then the remaining business will be considered at a time and date fixed by the chair. If the chair does not fix a date, the remaining business will be considered at the next ordinary meeting. If a remote member loses connection, the chair may adjourn the meeting for a short period to enable connection to be re-established. If the chair does not adjourn the meeting, the member will be deemed to have left the meeting at the point of failure and be deemed to return at the point of re-establishment. Only members present for the entirety of a debate and consideration of an item are entitled to vote. I won't talk about if technology fails to move the public because we don't have any public at the moment. Please ensure your electronic devices are muted and please activate the mute button on your tablet or computer when you're not speaking. The rules of debate remain the same. Please use the raise hand button, which is located under participants if you wish to speak. And we'll go through the list and notify the chair of anyone who wishes to speak. When there's been sufficient debate, the chair can request that we go to the vote, and voting will be by the usual function of green tick for yes, red cross for no, blue hand for abstain, which again are located under the participants section. Details of how members voted will not be kept or minuted unless a recorded vote is requested or individual requests that their vote be recorded, and it will not be heard or seen on the audio recording of the meeting. And I will notify the chair of the result of the vote. I'll now hand back to the chair to take over. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Okay, so we've got a fairly busy agenda today, and I know there's some key things that we want to discuss in quite a lot of depth, I imagine. So we're going to go through some bits quite quickly, and then we'll get on to some of those more meaty bits a bit later. I've got no apologies for absence. Is there anybody missing as we're looking around the room? I don't think there is there? I'm just noticing that we have no other women in this room. Never noticed that before. Let's fix that next time. Okay, notification of any other business. I have none. Chair's announcements. So, in accordance with council policy, this meeting is being audio recorded as well as filmed. The audio recordings will be available to view on ModGov and the film recording via the North Herts District Council YouTube channel. We are reminded members to make declarations of interest before an item. The detailed reminder about this and speaking rights is set out under the chair's announcements on the agenda. Matthew, am I supposed to be reading these notes or the other notes? Where's my...
Those are correct. There is a longer information on the agenda about a declaration of interest. So yeah.
But we're happy to do the smaller one in this meeting.
Yeah, you're fine to do that.
Excellent. Okay, I've got no public participation, so that leads me straight on to item number 5 on the agenda, which is the Shared Anti-Fraud Service SAF's Anti-Fraud Report for 19 and 20, and the progress with the delivery of the 20 and 21 anti-fraud plan. And Darren, I'm presuming that that's over to you.
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, members. Yes, it is. For those who don't know me, my name is Darren Bowler. I'm one of the 2 Assistant Council Fraud Managers at SAFs. First of all, apologies for Nick. As you can appreciate, we're in a number of different partners delivering similar reports. So I've given Nick the night off tonight, and I'm delivering this report to you.
That's very kind of you, Darren. Are we able to see you, or is video not an option?
Well, you can, but it's a question of seeing me or not hearing me, because the broadband here, I'm afraid, is not that great. So okay. The screen either freezes or you lose audio. So it's best that I'll probably continue from past experience. So I'm going to give you some highlights of the report, and then, as I'm sure you've all had an opportunity to go through it, offer myself up for some questions at the end. In all, the plan was delivered between both officers of the council and SAF's officers throughout the year, and the plan can be found Appendix C, which I believe is your page 47, if you need to refer to it. The KPIs for SAFs were delivered with the exception of referrals, that's reported fraud, which are detailed at 2.10 and 2.11 of the report, and that's on your page. We're reviewing this performance, the reduced amount of referrals against historic reporting for previous years, obviously, and what we're seeing in other partners to see if what we're dealing with is either a blip or a downward trend. That's not been determined as yet, but if we're looking at a downward trend, we're going to we're developing perhaps our relationship with other services to see if we can't make up the shortfall in those referrals going forward, and to make sure that we're covering across all of the departments within the council in respect to fraud referrals. The fraud losses stroke savings were just under £200,000 last year. There's some nice tables there at 2.12 on page 11. This value fluctuates each year, but it's comparable to other district councils in our partnership, SAF's partnership. The number of cases investigated in the year was 70, so that's investigated and closed. And that's the highest number at North Herts since 2015. And what we attribute that to is some actions taken at the beginning of the year to get up some low-level matters in the early part of 2019 to get those out of the way and deal with those as a result of some good work by Jill, who's the investigator at North Herts. Also, pleased to say the National Fraud Initiative activity at North Herts has been very positive throughout the year, and all high priority matters have been resolved, and a lot of that work has been done by officers of the council with a little bit of support from us as well. Although that's only a small value has been reported in those savings, and that's at 2.9 on your page 12. It can be taken in different ways, I suppose, but that small value probably provides quite good assurance that the prevalence of fraud is low. But it also suggests that we may need to clean up some data cleansing on what's being submitted to the NFI, to make sure that's exactly what's happening, and that's what we're seeing. From March this year onwards, like many other departments of the council, we've been supporting responses in respect to COVID-19 with new and emerging fraud threats that may impact on the council services. Obviously, the business grant is quite a big area of work that we've been supporting the Revs and Bends team with. And also the increased mandate stroke phishing frauds, of which there have been a few seen in the early stages of emails coming into the Revs and Ben's team, but I'm pleased to say that they've been picked up very quickly, referred to us, and we've dealt with them appropriately. And also members of the public have actually been contacting North Hearts, which I think is quite a positive, that members of the public are coming in and saying, you know, we've had these emails relating to council tax, we're not sure if it's a fraud or not. So members of the public have the confidence in the council to report those direct to them, which we've also dealt with. And almost last but not quite, the transparency code data for North Hearts District Council, the counter fraud work is included in the publication and is, I think, has been agreed by Ian Cooper as well. I'm sure Ian will correct me if that's not the case. Just throughout the report, just wanted to draw your attention and highlight some of the cases that Jill's been working on there. They give a flavour of the different sorts of work, the different values, the people that are committing fraud. I think you can read between the lines to identify what we're dealing with there. A little bit of work of joint working there with the DWP, some liaison with Settle, who provide your social housing, and also a nice blue badge campaign that took place earlier on in the year, which did identify quite a few issues and raised the public profile when the press release went out. A bit of a whistle-stop tour, but I do know you've got a busy agenda, so I'm more than happy to take any questions that anyone may have.
That's great. Thank you very much, Darren. I'm just going to guess what you look like. It's quite good fun. Okay, an interesting report there. Are there any questions or comments from anyone? I've not got any hands raised at the moment.
Oh, come on. Bloody lost it.
Michael Weeks, are you trying to raise your hand or?
I'm trying to. Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bowler, was it? Did I get your name?
Bowler, Darren Bowler.
Right. Good evening, Councillor Weeks. Yes, first name's Darren. Sorry, there wasn't quite enough room on the page.
Okay. Can I take you to paragraph 2.6 of your report and the table that's on page 9? Yeah. And
yes.
The box there.
Yes.
Item 5 in the box. Just a couple of questions, if I may. How do you qualify identity fraud? What's the definition of identity fraud? And secondly, of the 100 cases that were investigated, we seem to have resolved 77. The 23 remaining, are they sort of abandoned, or are they going to be investigated into the new year? Did you get all that? Hello?
Darren, you're muted. If you want to unmute yourself, Darren, you'll be able to answer.
Apologise, sorry. I clicked the button. It didn't necessarily start in that same year and can be carried over from the previous year on occasions the year before that. But they could also be cases that we haven't yet closed, or those that are still under investigation. So it's nothing sort of abandoned and left hanging. All the cases continue. So when we get into the report for next year, you'll probably some of the cases that we're still working on now currently will feature in that report as being closed. I didn't quite catch where you were referring to identity fraud from, though. I can talk to you about identity fraud, but I couldn't quite see where it was in that report.
So on the KPI number 6 onto 2.6, Darren, is making use of data to prevent identity fraud.
All right. Yes, sorry about that. Yes. So yes, I missed that. I was looking above. Sorry. So identity fraud is where, quite simply, somebody else is purporting to be somebody else and using their identity. And that happens quite often when we're talking about applications for housing, where they may already have been disqualified from housing and are purported to be using someone else's identity to obtain that. All the benefits, really, we see that there. And that's the kind of strictest version of identity. We do see quite a bit of false documents. So we may have people who are not UK nationals, but are EU citizens, presenting with documents which can be counterfeit or forged, and so they might not actually be entitled to those benefits and those claims for services from council. So we have done previously quite a bit of training in relation to counterfeit and forged documents within the council. So that's the two main areas.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments from anybody? Councillor Weeks, your hand's gone up again. Is there another statement you'd like to make?
Yes, please, if I may. Can I carry on with the report and take you to item 212? And can I ask about the recoverable losses of £163,000? That is potential recovery losses. They're not recovered losses, are they?
So yes, that's exactly the point. So we've identified that there's been an overpayment, and that usually relates to council tax and housing benefit. And that's reported to the Revs and Bens.
So you now have to try and enter into arrangements for payments with the people who have defrauded us here, or indeed take proceedings. Is that correct? Or
recover the money civilly. In respect of council tax, yeah, so in respect of council tax, that's a recoverable debt. So it's up to the council to deal with that how they want in respect of that. That can be placed onto the council tax bill and carried over, so that can continue to be paid. As you'll see from some of the examples, actually, I think there's a couple of real life cases in there where the people, because they've had undeclared income and undeclared capital, have repaid that money or are in the process of a monthly payment plan.
And finally, Chairman, if I may, can I take you to this case study on page 11, just below 214, and simply ask how it was. We had this guy. He was claiming, and suddenly he stopped. What made us investigate him at that stage? I would have thought when he stopped, he would have sort of been off the radar, as it were, but clearly not. What made you go after him?
So the clue is just towards the bottom there. He'd only ever declared 3 accounts, but they'd had less than a £16,000 capital limit. I think what's happened here is that the data matching that we were talking about earlier on, not just with the National Fraud Initiative, but also the DWP, being able to work closely with them, that brings up data matches where, without going into too many details because this is a public forum, they're able to compare and contrast different data sets from different government departments that are likely to show up bank accounts that haven't been declared to a council when there's been council tax and housing benefit and payment, but other departments are aware of them.
Okay, and finally, can I just take you to 220 and offer my your congratulations on the award you got there.
Thank you very much. I wasn't going to mention it this evening, but now that you have, Councillor, thank you much. I'll pass on the good wishes to the rest of the team.
I'll shut up now, Madam Chairman.
I doubt that. Okay. Anyone else got any questions or comments? Important to remember that this is the anti-fraud report and not the collections, so it will only deal with kind of how we are identifying fraud. I have a question for you, Darren, if I may, and it's a very small question. And oh goodness me, 210. The types of fraud being reported. I was just interested to know where, obviously our biggest group there is council tax discount and housing benefit. It seems to me that they're quite different in terms of both the value and the method of fraudulent behaviour around there. I was wondering why they were grouped like that.
They generally are reported on, claimed on the same application. So the form process for council tax reduction and housing benefit is a simultaneous claim. There are instances where somebody wouldn't be entitled to housing benefit. So if they owned their own home and had a mortgage, they wouldn't be able to claim housing benefit for the mortgage side of things. So if they were privately renting, they would, for example. So they would only be entitled to claim council tax. So that's why you get a bit of a difference. But generally speaking, we see more HB, housing benefit, and council tax claims together than we do council tax on its own.
So there is no value in separating those.
If we've got council tax on its own, we put it into the report, generally speaking. And looking at this report, that then if there's no council tax on its own, then yes, then it's because we don't see council tax on its own in the fraud figures for North Herts this year or last year.
Okay, good, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Okay, I've got no hands up at all. Right, so we simply, for this part of the agenda, needed to review the work to combat fraud in 2019 and 20, and the performance of SAFs in meeting your KPIs, which I'm satisfied that you are, and to receive an update on the progress and delivery of 2021 plan. Is everybody satisfied with that? And can we move on? Let's get some nods. Yes, excellent. Darren, I don't believe you've got any further part to play on our agenda, so if you wanted to drop out, feel free. If there's anything that you want to stay and watch, by all means do, or tune into our YouTube channel.
Thank you, Chair. I shall leave you in peace and quiet. Thank you very much for your time. Good evening.
Thank you. All right then, moving on to item number 6, the annual governance statement of 1920. This is the report of the Policy and Community Engagement Manager. Ruben, I'm going to just go straight to you.
Thank you, Chair. As stated, this is the report that brings to the committee the draft annual governance statement for 1920 and the action plan for the following year. This is the committee's opportunity to review and comment on the draft before it's finalised, which I'll bring back to you in September. I just want to very briefly go through the report and highlight the appendix at the end. So 5.1, I did talk about when I wrote this report that no prior consultation had gone through, but I've subsequently sent a copy of this to SIAS and Ernst & Young and the Shared Anti-Fraud Service, and Ernst & Young have asked for comments to be added in around the actions that NHDC took around the pandemic at the end of March, the support of our residents, our businesses, our voluntary community sector, and the work of the Recovery Board, which I'm happy to do, and I'll revise that and then bring that back in September to you. Moving down to 7.4, just to remind, and 7.3 to remind the committee how the AGS is prepared. It's an input and a review against the framework principles of 2016 from Sit for Solace. And the appendix is a meaningful but brief communication of that review. And I'll skip down to 8.4. Which is the process where the senior leadership team took examples of the arrangements and examples against that for those framework principles and scored them to meet all of those principles. The assessment there was substantial, and any weaknesses are identified for the action plan for the next year. The self-assessment itself, which runs to over 100 pages, has not been appended yet, but will be with the final version of the draft summarised annual governance statement. Mm-hmm. I wanted to say also that I've also incorporated the Head of Internal Audit's annual report, which was presented at the June meeting, so that's included in there as well. That's all I think I really wanted to say, but other than I will be back in September with a finalised version of this. Happy to take comments now from the committee, and any questions they may have. And I'm happy to be emailed those comments before I come back in September to me. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So just to highlight, sorry, I might have missed it as you were going through it, but the additional items, considering where we're at and the season that we're in, the exceptional circumstances, is there anything that you wanted to comment on those with the COVID stuff, is what I'm saying?
I think what I didn't do, but given where we were when lockdown happened, and I'd written a lot of this report beforehand, I wanted to capture it as best I could possibly in the next version. But I accept the point that Ernst Young's saying we've done quite a lot already, and we're going to take that work forward, and then we can report back on that as we go through in September and in March.
And so what you're saying is that there's nothing reflected here, but it will be in September. Is that?
It's certainly in the self-assessment document, but it's not in the summarised version you've got in front of you. Is
there any clues you can give us as to what will be in that?
It's mostly around the support that we provided to residents, all those signposting to government grants and schemes, the community support fund that we established, the food parcels, that whole gamut of stuff, you know, relaxing PCN notices, those sorts of things.
Of course, it's impossible to say what the final thing will look like, right, at this stage.
But I can certainly circulate that to you sooner if need be.
Yeah, I'd love to see that.
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Comments from anybody else? Any hands up? Gosh, okay. All right, so remind me of the next stage of this. This now will go to Cabinet.
This will come back to you in September for finalisation. It's you.
All right, great. I'm flipping between documents to remember all this stuff. All right, so unless there are any questions and comments, I'm happy to move on. I don't think, Matthew, that we need a vote on this because we're simply looking at it and checking that it is in the right place. I think what I'm hearing, Ruben, is that this is quite organic and fast moving, so you're happy to take questions, comments through email, and you'll circulate what you've got about COVID when it comes.
Absolutely.
Great. Matthew, are you happy for us to move?
That's fine, Chair. Sure, no problem. Thank you.
Brilliant. All right. So let's get into risk management then. So Ian, over to you to talk to us about where we are at with risk management.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to start with paragraph 8.2, which is the COVID-19 risk. This is the risk as it was when Risk Management Group reviewed it last, but it is kept under constant review, this risk, as you'd expect, and there have been changes since then. Although it's included here, as I believe that the general themes that are in there are still very relevant. We're currently working on yet another iteration of the update, and that reflects sort of the following areas. It reflects the lifting of lockdown restrictions and how service delivery is moving back towards a different normal, such as museum opening, play areas opening, leisure centres opening, but also managing the risks involved in that, whether that's us managing the risks or our partners or contractors managing those risks. It also covers creating a project board to oversee recovery, as we are moving into that recovery phase rather than disaster management phase. But also at the same time, alongside that, starting planning in case there was a second spike and whether that has local or national implications of that. So that's that paragraph. Then moving on to paragraph 8.3. This relates to the cyber risks, and there's a brief description in the report around the latest situation of those, which is fairly unchanged from the last time you saw it. A much longer description in Appendix B, which highlights the actions taking place and the sort of remaining risk that sits there. Proposal is we keep the score for that risk at an 8, and that next time review the risk to consider what the target score should be for that risk, which is the new model of how we assess risks, which is what you agreed the last time with the risk reports, and also what business as usual will look like and how we kind of get to that over time. Then moving on to the next paragraph, 8.4. This is the risk in relation to climate change and the achievement of the strategy. It's only really been presented to you here because of the previous discussion at this committee. The proposal is not that it should be a corporate risk, but because the score is retained as a service risk. But as I said, because of the discussion, so you can see the thinking through that. And that is because the focus is on the risk of not achieving the strategy. It's not looking at the broader, wider impacts of climate change and actions by others. That would be impossible for the council to kind of do everything. It is around that strategy. And whilst the impact of not achieving the strategy is high, hopefully the risk is fairly low in that we have got a strategy that, while it's challenging, there is a political focus on it. And there are a number of actions that are in progress and we're looking to achieve those. So that's where we get to the overall score of 6 in relation to that. And then finally, paragraph 8.5 is the annual report, which is referred from here onto Cabinet, then full council. I wasn't going to take you through the report. It's basically a summary of everything that this committee has done over the previous year, with a few added things added into it. But obviously, if you've got any questions on that, I'm happy to answer them. That's my brief summary of the report, but I have to take any questions on any of the specifics.
Thank you very much. Oh, got some hands up. Who'd have thought? Let's start with first one I can see, Councillor Sam Collins.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm just looking at the risk matrix we've got, the sort of the gold, amber, and red sort of table that we've got on the documents there. And I know we've got Brexit and coronavirus as the sort of top tier of risks on those. There is obviously, as it looks like we're heading towards a pretty disastrous Brexit and coronavirus is savaging the economy as well. Is a general economic crash a risk that needs to be introduced onto that? Because we are facing sort of really unprecedented economic situation in the UK. And I'm just wondering, is that something that would be within the scope of that document? Because it would have very wide reaching economic impacts in terms of council tax, in terms of, we've just heard about the fraud situation. All of those things really could have a big impact on NHDC. So I'm just wondering if that should be on there. And and I have made Ian Albert, Councillor Albert's cogs aware of that, because I can see that in his face. So is this a question that I really don't know the answer to? So I'm leaving that one to the floor.
I'm wondering whether it's covered with managing the council's finances, but let's see if Ian agrees.
Yeah, making my cogs aware too. I would say that it's certainly at the moment kind of capturing the COVID impacts, but over time, maybe hopefully when there's less to do in direct response to COVID-19, it might be necessary then to look at whether that becomes its own risk, or as Councillor Aspinwall said, where we capture it for all the other risks that are there. We need to keep the number of risks manageable and have a right focus, but there is definitely an impact we need to consider in there. So yeah, I think it's something we keep a watching eye on.
Ian Albert, did you want to comment on that?
Only to say, I mean, Chair, that we've got a risk management group which we have quarterly. The next one's in early August. We can certainly kind of have a discussion there. Both I and Councillor North attend that with obviously other officer colleagues. We could pick that up there, and we'll clearly keep that under review as to whether that makes sense. But I think a lot of the things that Councillor Collins mentioned are in the current risk. But yeah, I agree. We should certainly keep it under review. We'll make sure that's discussed at the next meeting.
Happy with that, Sam? Great. Sam North.
Thanks, Chair. I have a number of questions. My first question is not aiming to be targeted, but just a general question. Is as a part of the novel coronavirus risk, Appendix A on the report, it says that the risk manager is the service director for place. I'm just wondering how the decision to put Vaughan Watson in charge of the risk as the risk manager was decided rather than the managing director of the council, bearing in mind it covers most areas of the council and how it is run. Is there a particular reason as to why a service director was chosen over the managing director, CEO?
Ian, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Initially, it would have been because emergency planning comes under service director place. So Brian Simmons is our emergency planning officer, and right at the start, that would be the most appropriate place for it to sit. I take your point that it may be more appropriate to sit somewhere else. In practical terms, both myself and the managing director, as is now, feed into this process, and this risk gets regularly reviewed by a number of people. So it has got focus across the council. So it has to be someone, and I think it just happens to be that person because of that sort of slight historic linkage. But I think the focus is sufficiently across the council that everyone's inputting into it.
Okay, yeah, not a problem. I just wondered if there was a specific reason, but yeah, because I know that the amount of work that sort of myself, Councillor Albert, and you do on coronavirus and tackling the issues is something not to be disregarded. I think obviously bringing forward the risk management group and the within the report at the end, the annual report on risk management, it does highlight sort of the attendance from myself and Councillor Albert. And again, I would just recommend to any other councillors that wish to attend those meetings, they are incredibly informative and very beneficial to understanding the council's risks and how they work. My final question is on the business continuity planning, and something that we as a new administration like focusing on is ensuring that as many councillors and officers are up to speed with what is going on, how the council is doing it, and how we're being proactive as a council. And I think one of the areas that myself and Councillor Albert have discussed before is having seen coronavirus and its effects on the council, and clearly, as Councillor Collins has already mentioned, the impending financial crash caused by Brexit, and in the longer term, the sort of climate emergency that we currently face. Business planning and continuity planning in particular is going to be unbelievably important. So I'm just wondering, Ian, Cooper, if there's any plan for us to review our current business continuity plans. I know that they are kept up to date regularly, but whether there's been any thinking as to whether that would change. I think another beneficial thing that's come out of this new administration is clearly the training of all councillors on business continuity. And I think it's just good to keep that momentum up, bearing in mind the real concerns that we do face over the next sort of year or so, few years.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, I think that's probably like a miss from my update in terms of where the next version of the COVID-19 risk is going, is that there will be a need for all service areas to relook at business continuity, given that we're using up most of our resilience at the moment, so there's not much slack. So we need to think about what if something else happened on top of COVID-19, how do we then react again, and how do we keep things running? Yes, I agree, we need to look at that, and some of that's in progress, but just need to make sure it's done across everywhere.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, wonderful. Michael Weeks, Councillor Weeks.
There you go, thank you. Could I look at the matrix with you on page 75?
Yes.
Please.
Yes.
And can I say that with my love of waste and rubbish, it's very pleasing to note that waste is no longer in the top quartile there. It's come down a couple of notches, which to me is very, very pleasing. However, and I'm not sure this is an answer I can get from this committee, but I just wonder why we are showing the delivery of the waste collection and street cleansing services contract still as such a high risk. The contract's now been running for 2.5 years, and so far as I can establish, things are they're running quite well. So I wonder why it's such a high risk still. Secondly, I don't know if Ian's going to answer this. If not, perhaps we can find someone else. Can I run down now to page 93, please, which is also a waste question. And again, Ian might not know the answer, but nearly there. We now, sorry. We no longer refer to, can't find the paragraph. It's a question of what we call food waste and garden waste. Somewhere in here, we now call it one thing. And I just wonder why that is, because my understanding was the eventual plan was that the two commodities would be separated anyway. The garden waste would continue to be turned into fertilizer, and food waste would eventually go into one of the combustor thingy machines and turn into fuel. If that's still our long-term plan, I'm wondering why we're both putting both commodities under one heading. Again, I don't know if Ian knows the answer to this, but if someone can find out for me, that would be good.
Okay, so I've got two questions there. Thank you, Michael. So we've got the waste, why is it high 2.5 years into the contract, and also why is food and garden waste now reclassified with the title of organic waste? There is an explanation on there, Councillor Weeks. I'm not sure whether or not you find that insufficient, but it does talk about garden waste originally identified it as being the introduction commencement of a new chargeable service, and that is no longer relevant because the new service has gone through the first renewal process. But the main operational risk remains the introduction management of those concessionary rates and introduction of direct debits. Whereas for food waste, it continues to be a failure of utilisation as the risk. And so therefore the two risks could be classified as being in together. And that's kind of the reason that's been given. If that's unsatisfactory to you, I suggest that we, if Ian agrees, that we take this as a written question to the portfolio holders. I dare say that Ian may not be in a position to respond to those. Although Ian, you may well prove me wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I've read the explanation there, and yeah, in isolation, it does make sense. But I wonder, with regard to our long-term plan and food waste, it's quite valuable. It's more valuable than organic waste on its own because it's energy, can be turned into energy, and that's a good green issue, isn't it?
Yeah, Ian, are you able to pick up on that, or should we submit that as a written question from this committee?
I think I'll give you an answer. So the responsibility for disposal of organic waste streams sits with the county council. It's not us to dispose of it. We just take it wherever the county council tells us to take it to. At the moment, that is part of a long-term contract where it all goes to the same place. I understand that once that contract is up, the county council will look at a sort of separation whereby the food, as you say, Councillor Weeks, goes to one place and the garden waste goes to a different place. But at the moment, they're in a contract, and until that ends, that's all they can do. So that's why they're kind of lumped together at the moment.
It still comes down, we're giving the wrong signal when we refer to both commodities under one name. I'll leave it there.
Matthew, are we able to submit a couple of written questions to the portfolio based? I'd like some sort of agreement or commentary from her around the where waste currently sits on the risk management, and also the long-term plan for that organic waste. If we could just get a statement from her on that, that would be cool. If we could perhaps bring that back. Are we able to do that, Matthew?
Yeah, sure. So I'll get that written out to the portfolio holder.
Wonderful, thank you. Are there any further questions on the risk management review? Oh, Councillor Weeks, if you could just mute, that would be great. Appear to have the power. Great, thanks a lot. I've got one question, and I fear it might be a stupid one, but I can't see climate change on the final risk profile. Is that, am I missing it, or is that because of what we've just said, that it's not a corporate risk, or it's a strategic one?
Because the proposal is it's a service risk, it does not feature on the corporate risk matrix.
Great, thank you.
Could I just very briefly come in there on that one, and just perhaps for the benefit of any members of the public who are watching this video or indeed watch it at a later date, what we're not saying in terms of having climate change as a service risk rather than a corporate risk is that we're not taking it seriously. It's one of the most serious things that we're taking as an administration, as the council. But all it means is that rather than dealing with it as a corporate risk, which means that it's something that will impact the council, we are dealing with that in the portfolio manner through the political ways that we're doing it and through the cabinet subcommittee on climate change. So that will inform our policy on the climate change and the way that the council deals with the sort of environmental response that the council needs. But just to clarify, because I think that might come across quite badly if we don't mention that it is being taken as the #1 priority for this council.
Thank you, Sam. I think, yeah, absolutely. Must remember that, yeah, not being on here doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. And obviously we've had a lot of debate about that in the past. Okay, the recommendations on this update then are to note the reviews of the corporate risks for the quarter, namely the review of obviously the novel coronavirus risk with an unchanged score of 9, and the review of cyber risk and data protection, unchanged scores of 8, very high scores, and that we know and refer the annual report on risk management to cabinet and then on to full council. I'm going to take a vote on this one to make sure that everybody's happy to note that and then refer these on. So Matthew, you could just arrange that.
Yes, so members, if you want to use the green tick for yes and red cross for no. Okay, and that's resolved, that's carried, okay.
Wonderful, thank you very, very much. Okay, we're going to come on now then to the COVID-19 financial impacts, and this is a two-part paper, and I think that it may be beneficial if we discuss the part 2 parts first, so that we may return to this meeting to discuss the part 1.
Sorry, Chair, can I if it would be possible for me just to do a short intro, and then we'll then get Ian Cooper to take you through the part 2 sort of item, but probably that intro could be done probably in part 1.
All right, yeah, very happy to do that. Yeah, absolutely. So okay, if you want to take it away then, Ian.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and obviously thanks for agreeing just that I could sort of participate with Mr. Cooper in this meeting. The paper here was very much about actually wanted to provide assurances to this committee, to the Cabinet and to Council about where we are on our sort of financial situation. The detail that Ian Cooper will take you through is based upon the reports that we've been doing on a regular basis to government, the Ministry of Housing, Community and Local Government, and those reports have been done broadly on a sort of monthly basis and provided, as I say, to government and obviously copied round to Cabinet. But we wanted to make sure that there was some transparency here, and obviously that this committee and the council itself could see where we are. There's a lot of work going on. It's been, as we've touched on already this evening, and I think it's important, I think, to sort of stress that you know, we're very much continuing to operate our services as normal as we can under the current circumstances, thanks to the efforts of our staff and contractors, and obviously particularly this evening thanks to Mr. Cooper's team for helping to produce this paper. Now, we'll be touching on later on, we very much welcome the additional funding received from government and the announcement of support for some of our lost income. And I say we'll cover that in a bit more detail. But I think it's right to ask why government didn't deliver on its previous promise of fully supporting local authorities through the pandemic, because even with this funding, we're still faced with a shortfall in this financial year. And that clearly is only the current forecast. It could increase, we would hope it goes down, but it could increase if there is a second wave or indeed localised outbreak. And we do, as we've said before, want much greater clarity on future funding of local authorities like North Herts. This will mean we can much more effectively plan through our recovery board that we mentioned earlier on to support our residents, businesses, and help our local economy towards a full recovery. Because after years of what are cuts in government funding and forecasts of possibly more to come, our current financial strategy, you know, even before the stresses caused by the pandemic, was obviously recognising that we may well need to make savings or look for further efficiencies in future years. Now, I think it's worth just for this committee just to say that the financial strategy will be considered, and that's the medium-term financial strategy, will be considered by this committee on the 7th of September and then discussed at Cabinet. And I think the aim then is that we are proposing, I mean, obviously it's not formally announced yet, but they are proposing to make sure we can keep both the council plan and the medium-term financial strategy running alongside each other, that we will actually delay the early September council meeting and hold that towards the end of September, when we can both cover the medium-term financial strategy and indeed obviously the council plan. And that financial strategy obviously will then include our recommendation on the policy for setting the level of council tax for 21, 22 and beyond. And I think we'll obviously talk a little bit more about that as we go through the detail of this paper. But so we do recognise that this is absolutely, there are vital services provided by this council, and we hope that government continues to accept that it cannot expect our communities to bear the brunt of a continued funding shortfalls. So I think on that note, Chair, if I'm going to maybe sort of hand over to Mr. Cooper and obviously to you to sort of, so we can get to the part 2 item, and then I'll be available with Ian to answer any questions at the end of the introduction of the papers in front of us. Thanks, Chair.
Great, thank you very much, Ian. Okay, so I've not done this online before, so bear with me. We're going to now do the enter into part 2, which means I believe that we take a vote in order to exclude the press and public. So we now need to take a vote to consider passing the following resolution: that under section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972, the press and public be excluded from the meeting on the grounds that the following report will involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of part 1 of schedule 12A of the said act as amended. Matthew, if you could organise us to take this vote.
Yes, the members, if you want to use the green tick for yes and no red cross.
And I believe once that's passed that we'll be invited into a breakout room, is that correct?
That's correct, Chair. So that's been resolved, so to exclude press and public. So Vic Godfrey's going to organise a breakout room. So you'll see a message on your screen now if you want to join the breakout room.
And Vic, if you want to just let me know when I'm good to go.
Yeah, hi Chair, the breakout room's now closed.
Thank you. Are we streaming again? We are. Okay, great. Welcome back and thank you for your participation in that part 2 document. Let's go back then to part 1, looking at the coronavirus and the financial impacts of the coronavirus on North Arts District Council. Bearing in mind that we've obviously just reviewed our risk and this sits on there as a risk level 9. So we've got some things that we are recommended to do, and so we need to have some questions and comments around those. We did get some questions in part 2 that are exempt, where the public are exempt, that we agreed to discuss here. One of them was around homelessness and one was around parking. Sam, was it yourself that asked both?
No, I asked about homelessness. The other Sam asked about parking, but I'll start with the homeless one if that's okay, Chair. So on the numbers that we've been given, some of them neatly laid out on a table, which the public unfortunately can't see. It looks to me that the council is forecasting expenditure in this civic year of £200,000 on housing homeless people, which is a brilliant thing to do. But it also looks to me that the government are not giving us a penny for that. Now, I thought there was an announcement that those costs would be covered by central government. Is that not correct?
Ian Cooper, if you could pick that one up.
Yes, of course. So the costs there are forecast for the entire year based on sort of current numbers. That is net of housing subsidy. We did also receive a small specific grant in relation to homelessness, which is an order of about £5,000 to £10,000. I would think that government would say that the funding that they provided thus far in terms of the total, which now stands at 1.55 million, they would say that is there to cover homelessness amongst other things.
So see for me, this seems a little bit, well, it's not enough money, is it? Essentially, that we're getting here as a council. These are people who need a roof over their heads, quite frankly. We're in a situation where the coronavirus has not gone away. People are instructed still to, to work at home if possible. Yes, there are some suggestions people need to go back to work in offices, but we absolutely don't want people on the streets when they don't need to be. And frankly, I think in a country like ours, homelessness shouldn't even exist anyway. We can afford to house these people, as this is obviously the case. But with a £200,000 economic impact to North Arts District Council, when the government have explicitly stated that they would cover this cost, is really unacceptable. Now, I think it's great that we're housing these people, and I absolutely would object to us not putting that funding in and recommending we throw these people back onto the streets. They need to be housed, and I think it's a great step. And hopefully we can work with local organisations like Feed Up, Warm Up and other homelessness charities to make sure these people don't ever go back onto the street. I know there are some proposals around the district to create permanent housing for some of these people. But Chair, is it possible that, with the agreement of the rest of the committee, of course, that we could recommend to Cabinet that, because I know they're looking at this tomorrow, that we as North Arts District Council could write to the relevant government minister or even the Prime Minister and ask for more funding for this specific case, because to have a £200,000 impact on the people of North Hertfordshire, when really we should be providing permanent housing for these people, and that's something that should come from central government. And it's not just us as a local authority, it's a national issue, but we can only do what North Herts can do. Is it possible that we as North Herts District Council can write to the government and request that they cover this specific cost? Because I think it's pretty shameful that the government are not looking out for these people. And that's my point. Over.
Very well made. Thank you, Sam Collins. Any comments before we move to the other questions? Any comments on that particular point from Sam, from any of the rest of the committee?
Sam North, you need to press your button.
Sorry, Chair, I missed my button. I don't know if Sam was proposing that, but if he is proposing that that be a recommendation, I would gladly second.
I am.
Okay, I think that then we need to take a vote on that. So all in favour of what, Sam, do you want to just word your proposal again? Because Matthew's going to need to be writing this down.
Yes, I'll word it to make it slightly less wordy. So I would like this committee to recommend to Cabinet that North Herts District Councils write to the relevant government minister or the Prime Minister to request additional funding to cover the £200,000 impact that we're forecasting spending to house homeless people during the coronavirus pandemic.
During the entirety of the coronavirus.
The entirety of the coronavirus pandemic and going forward in the case of any second wave.
Okay. All happy with that for a vote? Matthew, are you happy?
Yes, that's fine, Chair. I've got that. Thank you.
Councillor Weeks, we'll come back to you. We're just going to put this to the vote now, unless this is a point of order on that vote.
I mean, Councillor Weeks, are you abstaining from the vote, or was that you asking to a question?
Has Councillor Weeks frozen?
You may have.
Do you want to? Oh, he's back now. Yeah, he's abstaining. Okay, so Councillor Weeks is abstaining.
Apologies, I thought you wanted to talk on it.
So the vote has carried that recommendation. Okay.
Excellent. Okay, so we are minded as a committee then to write to relevant cabinet members. Thank you very much. Councillor Sam North, do you have a question for us?
Thank you, Chair. Very recently, one of the Conservative MPs, Bim Afalami, has been raising concerns and issues about parking. He's an MP who I believe has no experience or respect of local authority, and is part of a government who's currently sort of on a full-blown assault against local authorities across the country. As a part of what he raised to the previous Hitchin committee, he suggested that Hitchin, part of North Hertfordshire District Council, should provide free parking for sort of residents of North Hertfordshire, probably not realising the real impact that would have, and the fact that we can afford not to bring in so much council tax due to the income that we bring in from parking. Part 8.14 of our document suggests that £1.37 million is the current financial hole that we are facing due to the lack of income from parking whilst the coronavirus pandemic has been ongoing. And I don't believe, or I'm not led to believe, that includes ongoing costs in the event that we were to suggest that parking should be free in Hitchin and indeed across the rest of the district. So my question to the service director is, do we have an update in terms of what the government are proposing, or indeed the MP Bim Afalami is proposing, would be the financial incentives for us as a council to make parking free? Because he did seem to suggest that he would have a look at whether the government would be able to foot the bill for obviously over £1 million worth of black hole in a council whose budget is in the low tens of millions. So clearly a big proportion. So I'm just wondering if there's any update, or if you could just tell us whether government would pay for us to have free parking in the district.
And board up.
Yeah. Okay, Chair, I'll take you through all of that. I think it's probably worth also doing a brief run through of some of the other areas of reports. So I've got updates too. I do all that in one go. And just to clarify, our budget is around about £15 million net, not tens of millions, just over sort of half between 10 and 20 million probably will get to ideas. We've got lots of money either there. So if I go through paragraph 8.3 and 8.4, at the end of last week, we were notified of how much we would receive from the £500 million announcement that was announced at the start of July. We've been allocated £178,000 of that, which takes the total of non-ring-fence grants we will have or will receive to 1.55 million. The indications of government are this is intended to meet all the cost pressures, but it is on ring-fencing, which are less than that. We can use it to meet the financial implications from income that is not covered by the income guarantee, which I'll come on to. So at the end of last week, we did receive more detailed information from MHCLG of how the income guarantee would work. The starting point is that councils should absorb losses that are up to 5% of their budgeted sales, fees and charges income. In the report, in paragraph 8.31, I used a total of 570,000 as that kind of 5% number. That at the time was based on all our income, excluding grants and contributions. So just taking the sales, fees and charges element of that means we actually have to fund a bit less, only around £490,000 is our first share to have to fund. Still a lot of money though, but that's our first bit of the share. And then there are three principles around lost income that government will then provide a 75% contribution towards, and they're as follows. Firstly, it's transactional income from customer and client receipts, excluding rents and investment income, which is generated from the delivery of services, which is budgeted for in 2020-2021. Income from traded services could be eligible, but pure commercial income is not. The second principle, as a result of COVID-19, which includes lockdown and social distancing and consequential reductions in economic activity, these income sources have been unavoidably lost and won't be recovered during this financial year. Local decisions that have been made will not be covered. Thirdly, compensation should be based on net losses where a local authority has been able to reduce expenditure or receive other compensation, only residual loss to be compensated for. So this creates certainty for lost parking income, but would not cover any free parking initiatives that are put in place to stimulate visit to town centres. Planning would seem to be covered for shortfalls this year, as there is not requirements to try and map out any recovery in future years. There is some certainty over net income from recycled materials. And so there's some uncertainty over net income from recycled materials, as it's a combination of both costs for some materials and income for others. So to work out what that exactly means in terms of how that meets the principles. Lost treasury management income is not covered, but it probably is okay to include all lost income from Hitchin Town Hall, as it is more transactional income from customers than the commercial activity. Lost garden waste income is a grey area again. It's likely it can't be counted, as the free period was essentially a choice made by council, by cabinet and then by council. Even if it is past that test, we'd also need to determine fully whether the reason for the services suspended was due to a lack of capacity for collections due to social distancing, or because people were self-isolating. And it would seem that self-isolating isn't covered, but reducing numbers of crews is covered. So another grey area, and so it needs to be looked into. As a result of all that kind of mixed together, I still can't give you an exact number, but I would say that the £2 million I've put in 8.31 and table 6 of the report is probably still a reasonable guess. It's probably of that order of magnitude, but you know, through clarifications about CLG, we need to work through all those unknowns to get to a final number, and even that was really based on the forecast we got at the moment, and will fluctuate as things come to reality. So I think that kind of covers the question from Councillor North. I'll just go on and cover a few other things in the report, if I may, Chair. Paragraphs 8.5 to 8.24 provide an estimate of the various impacts and how they've been calculated. They're just best estimates at this stage. In some cases, they're educated guesses, but they are just estimates to give you an idea of scale. We have no history or any previous experience to base this on, so that means they will be kept under regular review and reported back to this committee and Cabinet as frequently as is required. Paragraphs 825 and 826 describe the potential impact of housing growth or lack thereof and council tax reduction scheme eligibility on the council tax base. This can have a really significant impact on the medium term. This we looked at again when considering the medium term financial strategy, and as Councillor Alves already mentioned, that we brought to this meeting in September. Due to the way that collection funds work, there's no impact in this year. Paragraph 827 details potential risk in relation to business rate income. At the moment, it's more likely that we'll just lose out of the potential income from pooling rather than there being a shortfall against budget. But again, even if there are any impacts, it will again be felt next year because it's a collection fund. As Councillor Alves again already highlighted, the key reason for support is whether the council has sufficient reserves to avoid an emergency budget. The conclusion from paragraphs 832 and 833 is that it does. We do not have to set an emergency budget. We can use our reserves. Obviously, we welcome the limited support we've got from central government. We'd like more, but we will if we have to use our reserves to bridge the gap. And that's where, therefore, the reason for recommendation 2.3. In terms of the section on the capital programme, COVID-19 has had many knock-on impacts in terms of local plan progress, capacity to deliver projects, and the need to manage our cash balances. Table 7 therefore considers this early stage of the year the impacts on the capital programme. As detailed in paragraph 8.836, this does include the addition of a capital scheme that is completely unrelated to COVID-19, but is included here to give a complete picture. And finally, paragraph 839 details the potential for a further loan to the Hertfordshire Building Control Company. The company are providing regular updates to our shareholder representative and to finance officers across the partners, and the loan may not be needed, but it is felt appropriate at this stage to put the vision in place, as COVID-19 has had a significant impact on the company performance. As detailed in the loan was owned, as detailed in the report, the loan only provided if there's a good business plan for the company that showed that the loan would help it survive and be sustainable in the long term. You know, we're not going to give us a loan that's company that's not doing very well, but we fully expect it will do well, and therefore if it needs just a stimulus in the short term, we will put that loan in place along with the other partner authorities. Just wanted to cover those key issues from the report, but welcome to go back to any questions that I haven't covered through that summary.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Ian Cooper. I know that there is an awful lot in there, and I also know that there is an awful lot still unknown, as stated before. So we've covered some things already. We've got more debate that obviously needs to happen. It is now 9 o'clock. I'm happy to press through, as this is our last item, unless anybody is saying that they desperately need a comfort break. I see that Adam has put his light on, so we're all good there. He gets to a point in the evening where he becomes ghostly. Anybody else desperate for a break? Just wave. No. All right, let's crack on then. So Ian Albert, can I come to you next for comment on Ian Cooper's report?
I mean, I was only really just. I'm happy to come back on any other things later on, but I was going to cover the parking issue that Councillor North raised. I very much, as chair of the Hitching Committee, I very much welcomed Bim Afalami coming. I regarded it much in the same way that I regarded another illustrious attendee of the Hitching Committee, Councillor Weeks, when he came to talk about garden waste, and the waste contract those many moons ago. And I think it's important to hear from our local, MP. But in terms of his formal proposal, I think what we want to do, it may well come up at Cabinet tomorrow. We certainly would want to look at this within any proposals in relation to what the Recovery Board does. But I think it's absolutely right to say is that we would need to be very convinced that actually this is an appropriate way of spending our money and is an appropriate priority. And to do that, it's really important that we have an evidence-based decision, not just a knee-jerk decision. So I'm certainly keen to see, looking at on a weekly basis, how we track how parking income is going from the car parks that we run across the whole of the district. Because the important thing here, and he was quite noteworthy to say that when I asked Bim Afalami at the meeting as to say, well, of course, we cover the whole of North Herts district. Had you had a discussion with Oliver Heald, your neighbouring MP, about this? And he said, well, actually, no, he hadn't had a conversation with his neighbouring MP about it, which was rather surprising. So we cover the district, even if Bir Mafalami doesn't. And we would then want to understand what's happening across the whole of the district about parking. That seems the right way forward here. And I think that's something we would do in the round if we were looking at any changes. And I would still take some convincing of that. We would need to do it on an evidence-based way and not just a, well, that seems like a good idea kind of way. But thanks, Chair.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Councillor Sam Collins now.
Thank you, Chair. Just to follow on what from Councillor Albert said, much rather house the homeless than spend money on free parking. But that wasn't the point I was putting my hand up to raise. To sort of continue the points I've been making in a few directions. Obviously, there is a risk of a second wave. There are risks of localised lockdowns, as we've seen in Leicester, for example. Now, I don't think either Ian will have an immediate answer to this, the point I'm about to raise, but with those risks very real and we're very much aware that they could happen here at any point, at any time, and as the winter comes closer, it's more and more likely, frankly, and that's what the WHO is saying, that's what Public Health England is saying. Have we done any modelling on the forward economic impact of any other future lockdown, localised or national, and what that impact would have on this civic year's finances? Now, it would be possible to create some sort of model because we have data from April and May, which we know what that cost us, we know what that impact was. So we should be able to model what November, December or January, February lockdown might have on in North Hertfordshire. So the question I've got is have you done any of that work yet? And if not, will you do that work? And secondly, if you do that work, it would be really lovely to see it in front of this committee. At least I'd love to see it anyway. I don't know about the rest.
Okay, Ian, a local lockdown financial modelling. Anything on that?
We haven't done anything. I believe you'd end up with a lot of spurious accuracy if you did it, because it depends where we've recovered to by the time we're going to lockdown again, the extent of that lockdown, how long it's for, how long the second wave of recovery is after that lockdown. As I've said before, the redundancy in this report are just an estimate anyway. To add an estimate onto an estimate onto an estimate, I think you just end up with something very confusing, personally. What I will say is that in table 6 on page 112, we have got what our remaining balance on our general fund reserve is above the minimum level, and it's still showing after the impact of this lockdown and our, I suppose, moderately prudent forecast about recovery. We've still got £5.4 million of reserves that are essentially available, albeit they're going to be impacted in the medium term. So we are not in a position yet where we need to be taking knee-jerk reactions. But if there was a second wave and we needed to look at lockdowns again, I think we're in a good place to look at it very quickly, given the modelling we've done so far. But I wouldn't want to try and gaze into that crystal ball.
Thank you. Okay, I've got no other hands up, so I'm going to ask my question, which is around one of the recommendations that we've been asked to make, which is about forwarding on an approval of £350,000 spend to resurface the top deck of Larridge car park. I see it at paragraph 8.36 that there is water permeating through the surfacing and it is affecting 2 parking bays, and this may well become a more significant problem over time and affect further parking bays. And so the £350,000 spend is to avoid that. And I just want to make sure that we're highlighting that as a committee and ensuring that everybody is comfortable with that. We'll be asked to vote on whether or not they want that recommendation. Just seeing the cold facts like that makes me wonder whether or not that is the right thing to do. Adam Bruguera-Checker, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I noticed it's quite a significant amount of money, and I just wondered whether or not it's gone to a competitive tender process already, or if it's an estimate, because it's quite a bit of money, and just if we can get some clarification on that.
Okay, has it gone to tender? Sam Collins?
Actually, I'd like to know an answer to Adam's question, but I'll fire mine in. As most of you know, I cover parking stuff quite a lot with Paul Clark, helping him out on his work. his casework, and obviously it's in Highbury Ward, which I represent as well. That work has been very long planned, and it is needed. I think it's not to be excessive in describing it, because it's not this case, but if we don't do that work now, it's going to get a lot worse and could, you know, affect the revenue coming to the council significantly if we don't fix it. So it's a case of you need to fix your roof when the rain comes in, quite literally in this case. And if we don't do it now, it's going to cost us an awful lot more in future. So I think it's a prudent thing to do, and it has been planned for a long time, this work.
Okay. Morgan Derbyshire, Councillor Derbyshire, you did have your hand up. It's gone back down. Are you sure?
I have a quick question, yes, about the lairage.
Okay.
It states it needs to be approved by full council.
It does.
Is there any way we could do it without going to full council? Because whilst the car parks are quite empty at the moment, surely it's better to get the work done ASAP rather than dragging the process out for when, hopefully, if lockdown is lifted a little bit more people will be shopping, the car parks will be full, we'll be losing more revenue with it being empty.
Brilliant point. Yeah, lovely.
If that's a proposal, I'd second that. Sorry to jump in.
Okay, so we've got some really good questions there, Ian. I'd like to know. I think Sam Collins put it forward there around, actually, if you don't do it now, it's going to cost you a lot more money in the long run. I hear that. Is there any evidence of that? Because I would like to see that. We're also being asked, has it gone to competitive tender, and can it be fast tracked?
Okay, so in terms of the question around tendering, Mo, we're looking at options at this stage. That's an estimate. It's possible we've identified an option that will be a bit cheaper than that, but we'd like to put the estimated amount into the capital programme just in case the alternative doesn't work, which is a different way of dressing the surface rather than sort of going deep into the existing structure, which could be, you know, a reasonable amount less than the estimate we got there. So not a final price by any means, but for the purpose of the capital programme, we need to get that kind of agreed before we can take it too far down that process. Also say it's not just about lost revenue. We're nowhere near their stage yet, but over time, water seeping into concrete causes concrete to crack, and we'll end up with much bigger problems and eventually concrete that will fail. And that's not a place we want to be getting into. So it's not just around the lost income of a couple of parking spaces and maybe that going to more parking spaces. Eventually, we're talking about serious problems. So yes, in the long term, this essentially needs to be done. And I suppose in permission, under the finance regs, anything over 100,000 needs to be agreed by full council in terms of capital programme. If I thought there was a real opportunity for this to be done quickly, yes, I consider emergency powers, but we are still looking at this alternative, and therefore actually going to full council in September probably works out reasonably well. Lairage isn't our busiest car park, and it should be possible to do this on a sort of phased approach where you do a bit of an area at a time. It's not a full closure of the car park we're looking at for this to take place. So I think it is manageable without any significant impact on the public, even once demand for parking has picked up again.
Lovely, thank you very much, Ian. I really appreciate that insight. So I feel satisfied with those answers. I'm not seeing any hands up, so I'm presuming that others are also satisfied. We do have another thing to look at, which is around the delay of capital spend as detailed in table 6. I've had no questions on that, so I'm going to presume that there are no issues with what's been presented to us. So we'll now move to a vote on this. I'm sensing Morgan may need to step away momentarily before we, are you okay, Morgan? Thumbs up. Oh, he's frozen his screen. That's clever. Okay, let's progress. So our recommendations are that we note the forecast financial impact of COVID-19, being very aware that this could be subject to significant change at now and in the short, medium, long-term future. So I think that we need to be very clear on that. That needs to be put through to Cabinet, that we are clear on that and that we have scrutinised it with that in mind. That we approve the adjustments to the Q1 revenue budget monitor, and then we approve the delay of capital spend. We will be saying that we recommend that Cabinet then recommend to full council that they note the impact of the forecast impact, the available reserves, that they approve the 350k for the Lairridge car park, and that they approve, in addition to the investment strategy, that would allow the council to provide that loan that Ian referenced to Hertfordshire Building Control of 65k if required. So my, I mean, we did have a proposal and a seconder there around fast tracking. I am satisfied that we can't. So unless there is anybody that is waving at me saying that they want a vote on that, we're not going to vote on that. But we will vote on the recommendations for this part of the agenda that I've just read out. So if we could just arrange that everybody's happy to put that through to Cabinet with this report, that we have noted it and that we agree with the recommendations for them to put through to full council if they desire. So if we can have a yes or a no on that.
Okay, Chair, that's all carried.
Wonderful, thank you very much. I might be wrong, but I think that's the end of the agenda. Hang on, there we go, right back. So we need to have a discussion about possible agenda items for future meetings. Are there any that anybody would like to discuss? And obviously, if you do want to discuss things at this committee and you don't get to say them in this point that we have every time, do just email them to me and I'll pick that up in due course. But is there anything that anybody wants on the agenda going forward? Obviously, we have a full plan of agendas with the different things that we discuss. Each one generally takes quite a cyclical nature. I'm feeling for time to see if there are any hands up. I've got no hands up. I think that I would just like to say that that COVID-19 financial implications, I think, should be a standard agenda point for each meeting. And obviously next time we'll be looking at the medium-term financial strategy anyway, and no doubt that will be all over it. So unless there's no other hands up, I think that we are able to call this meeting to a close unless Matthew tells me otherwise.
No, that's absolutely fine, Chair.
Wonderful. Thank you all very much for your participation.
Thank you, Kate.
Bye. See you next time.
Thank you.
Okay, are you able to